Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Let's Dev. Today we're returning to once again take on one of our biggest rivals here on Let's Dev, the Match 3 game. Now long-time viewers already know, but the Match 3 game type has eluded me on more than one occasion, and as a result I've never been able to create it in Game Maker. But I am determined, and I have so many ideas that could be used with that game type that I just can't let it go. And yes, while I could probably find a tutorial online, I feel like I possess the knowledge and capability to pull it off. I just need to figure out the missing ingredients. So today's plan is simple. Once again, try to build a Match 3 game type from scratch. We'll start on the basics of loading tiles and having them disappear when matched in a row or column of 3. And for reasons that'll become clear later, we'll do something different this episode and end with a bit of personal reflection. Sounds like a plan, so let's get to it. Starting off, I traded familiar ground. I created an array of colors and gave the tile a type variable to determine said color. This would also be used for matching later on. Next, I created a loop that would spawn in our initial load of tiles. So far, so good. I created a floor object specifically to determine an absolute endpoint for all the tiles, and gave the tiles a falling variable. I then went about figuring out how to have the tiles fall until they touched either the floor tiles or the tiles beneath it. And I'll admit, perhaps it was due to recording while not fully awake, or I was just having an off day. Whatever the reason, I just could not get this to work in the step event, despite what I assumed should be proper code. So instead, I opted for the more simple option of using GameMaker's built-in collision. In the collision with the floor code, I simply stopped the tiles from moving, and in the tile collision, I had the tiles check for collision and reposition themselves so they were no longer colliding. This actually had a pretty nice side effect that gave the tiles an initial spring on load, which was pretty great. So now that we had our tiles spawned, it was time to set up the check event. First, I had to find a way to check that our tiles were placed, so I set up a global variable that would change once all the tiles were done falling. Then in the tile object, I got to work setting up the actual check code. Much like before, the best way I knew to do this with objects was to literally check for the surrounding tiles. This time I used the instance place function, which I found to be more reliable in recent projects. So I set up checks for left, right, up, and down, and stored those as variables. To start, I just wanted to check for rows of 3, so if left and right tiles existed, I compared the types. If they matched, I deleted all 3 of them. This kind of worked. I forgot to add the global check, so I added the global check and, still broken. I switched around some code thinking it was a conditional issue, but things only got worse. Sometimes the tiles would disappear, sometimes they'd fall, sometimes they'd just ignore everything. So it was time to try something else. I decided to try something completely different, which would require a data grid. The grid was as wide and as high as our current grid. I thought it would be a smart idea to tie the grid to the tiles during the check phase. That way it's pure data and not left up to collisions or position checks. Again, I wasn't 100% here, but my attempt to compare data like I did with the tiles themselves just didn't work. And I ended up spending over 30 minutes trying to figure it out. And as the hour mark passed, I accepted that it was time to take a break. I came back a bit later with at least one good idea. Before I started recording again, I added a check for empty space below the tiles. And if that empty space existed below it, I forced the tile back into the falling state. At least this way, the tile should now cease getting stuck in mid-air. So coming back, I realized I had to be grossly overthinking this. So I went back to the object approach. The falling code worked nicely, however, a new issue popped up. Sometimes, despite tiles sharing the same type, they weren't disappearing. So I set up a debugger of sorts to check what was being recorded for each tile. It seems that for whatever reason, when tiles are destroyed, sometimes tiles were being completely skipped over. And it took over 15 minutes of repeated testing to notice a pattern. Only tiles below and to the right were giving me weird results. Turns out I was checking for positions 1 pixel further than I should have, which I'm almost positive is due to how GameMaker handles positioning. So because I checked for the absolute size of our tiles plus 1 instead of just the tile's size itself, that was causing the code to get confused, and was likely the root of many of our issues. With that problem resolved, we could now look to spawning replacement tiles. Simple, I thought. Just have them spawn above the board and have them fall into place. Makes sense, right? Well, the rivalry continues because no, that wasn't the case at all. Tiles kept getting stuck mid-air and I just couldn't for the life of me figure out why. Even if I spawned tiles with enough offset that they shouldn't be colliding with each other mid-air, they still stopped mid-air. Yeah, let me save you another 30 minutes and tell you the reason for this was because I wasn't spawning them high enough. Yup, a simple miscalculation as to how high above the board I had to spawn tiles was the culprit, which I'm chalking up to my brain being absolutely fried by this point. And really, as much as I joke about not being in the right state of mind, I think it's actually a pretty accurate explanation. Like going into this, I was already pretty intimidated, and I almost didn't even come back from the break. Like, I almost chalked this up to being another loss, and I wasn't going to even put this video out. But I came back out of sheer stubbornness more than anything, really. And while I hated the 2 hours of failure that led to it, I'm actually relieved that I was able to code through that doubt. And I'm glad I didn't give up. So hopefully, if anything, some of you out there with your own coding demons will see this as a reason to keep at it. Sometimes things will elude you, but keep trying and no matter what, don't give up. Even if it's something as seemingly as silly as a match 3 game type. Perseverance will always get you through eventually. And for Let's Dev, that perseverance means we finally get to move on to the next stage or stages of our match 3 game. But for now, that'll do it for this episode of Let's Dev. So remember that if you like this video or enjoy Let's Dev in general, be sure to hit that like button. If you aren't already subscribed, be sure to hit that subscribe button and be sure to turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. And as always, be sure to leave your thoughts on our progress in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.